Okay. Okay, good morning, Boker Tov to everybody. We're in Parashat Vayakhel Pekudei, and we have Parashat HaChodesh as well. We won't discuss it today. We'll deal with Vayakhel Pekudei, and we have a repetition about Parshiot Mishkan. We know that it's in Parashat Vayei Sarah, when Abraham sends Eliezer to bring a wife to Yitzchak. We find a long story of Eliezer in his way, and what happened, Siman that he asked for Kadosh Baruch Hu to make, and then when he comes to Lavan and Betuel, he repeats everything, and we know that the Gemara says, the Yafasi Chatan Shel Avdei Avot, Yoten Mitorotan Shel Banim, which means that usually we don't repeat in the Torah, but we learn from each tag, from everything. And it's very interesting that we have this famous comment on the repetition of the story of Eliezer, but we don't see so much comments, so many comments about the big repetition of Vayakhel Pekudei and Trumat Tetzaveh. It's not just the same things. It's good morning, Mrs. Posner. It's not just the same thing. It's the same te'amim even. You know that if you lay in Truma, you must be able to lay in Vayakhel. If you lay in Tetzaveh, you must be able to lay in Pekudei, because it's mamash the same thing. We have the separation between Truma, which deals with Klei Mishkan, with the structure, whereas Tetzaveh deals basically with the Bgadim, with the Kohanim, with the people who make the role in the Mishkan, and with the same exactly separation in Vayakhel Pekudei, where Vayakhel is very similar to Truma, either in the Te'amim or in the words, and Pekudei is very similar to Tetzaveh. So we have to understand why the repetition comes. And as we know, as I said before, in Sefer Shemot we have a lot of repetitions. Let's think of the Makot. Where do the Makot appear in the Torah? So we think about all Sefer Shemot, but not. It's in Parashat Shemot we have nothing. In Parashat Beshalach we have nothing. So we have two parashot dealing with the Makot, right? Vayera and Bo. We have 7 Makot in Vayera and 3 Makot in Bo. And we have to ask ourselves, why is it separated into 2 parashot? I would, I don't know, it will be too dense for us, but why not putting 10 Makot in 1 parasha? I can say that parashot Shmot and Beshalach are the opposite of one other. You have the Shibud in Parashat Shmot without the Makot, just the plain Shibud, and you have the plain Geulah in Parashat Beshalach. You have the throwing the babies into the Nile in Parashat Shmot, and you have throwing the Egyptians into the Nile, or taking Am Yisrael out of the Nile in Parashat Beshalach. So you see here that you still have 2 parashot. It's what we call the chiastic. It's not the first and the second, it's the first Shmot and the fourth Beshalach, and we have the second and the third Vayera and Bo, 2 for the Makot. We have 2 parshiot for the Matan Torah. We have either Yitro at length, and we have Mishpatim. Either you can say that it makes all the pratim of the Matan Torah, or at the end, in Peret Kaf Daled, you have the mamash repetition of Matan Torah with all the Naaseh V'Nishma, with all the throwing the blood, with all the korbanot that were a part of Matan Torah. We have Trumat Tetzaveh, we have Vayakhel Pekudei, and as we said, we have Trumat Tetzaveh and Vayakhel Pekudei as 2 couples that are very similar. And we have to understand the parasha, the Mishkan. As we know, there is a big machloket between the Meforshim, Rishonim, whether the Mishkan came lechatchila, as we think, as we learn from the kindergarten in Parashat Trumat Tetzaveh, before Chet HaEgel existed, or that the Mishkan came just as b'diavad, as a part of the punishment of Chet HaEgel, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees that Am Yisrael needs some personification of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chas v'shalom, he needs it, a dmut, a pesel, and therefore we have the Mishkan. As Rabbi Yehuda Halevi described it in his book, The Kuzari, he says that there is no difference between the Kruvim and the Avodah Zorah of the Egel. The only difference is that this one HaKadosh Baruch Hu ordered, and this one HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't order you. Meaning to say that there is no real, sometimes we come to Chazir and we say it smells bad, it's ugly, and according to Chazal, don't say it's ugly. Say the only difference is that the HaKadosh Baruch Hu told me not to eat that. So it meaning to say that there is no real difference between the Goyim and ourselves, between our avoda Chas v'Shalom and their avoda. God worshipping is very similar, but this one HaKadosh Baruch Hu ordered you, and this one HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't order you. In any case, we're coming back to the point that there is a shita that all Chet HaEgel caused to the Mishkan, to the need to Am Yisrael to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu dwelling in a specific place, etc. But the Zohar HaKadosh and some of the Meforshim say that there are two different aspects of the Mishkan. The Mishkan existed before Chet HaEgel. We didn't need Chet HaEgel for being ordered about the Mishkan. But the Mishkan comes back later after Chet HaEgel. And we'll try in this shiur to see some of the light differences between before and after. I'll just start with something from last week's Parshat. You know the Rogachover, the famous in Dvinsk. Dvinsk is the second big town of Latvia, and the famous one was the famous Rav was Meshech Chochma, Meir Simcha Midvinsk. So Posner, if you say something, I don't hear you. I think you're muted.
I'm mumbling to myself because
okay.
I know where you're going, because I get clear on this too. But the Meshech Chochma and the Sforno, it's a totally different picture.
Okay,
good.
I'm not talking about Meshech Chochma, but I'm just talking historically about him. He was the Lithuanian Rav of Dvinsk, where at the same time there was a big Talmid Chochem, a huge Talmid Chochem called the Rogachover, of a leader of the Hasidic community of Dvinsk. It's very interesting. They were both at the beginning of the 20th century, and they were biggest Talmidei Chachomim to different people. You know, one of the famous things that Rogachover said, that he learned Torah all time, even in Tisha B'Av he learned, against the halacha. So people asked him, what are you doing with the halacha? So he said, okay, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would punish me for that, for learning too much Torah. So I don't, he was so adherence of the Davuk B'Torah, and he was a big Talmid Chochem, and he has comments with his comments on the Torah, on the Rambam, is based on a lot of Mareh Mekoimus. Ayen there in Menachos, Ayen there, and you have to understand what he said. And in any case, he comes from Megillat Esther. In Megillat Esther, we find that when they established the Chag, so Mordechai says, Liyot osim et yom 14 b'chodesh Adar ve'et yom 15 bo b'chol shana v'shana. So we have a repetition, et yom ve'et yom. So the Gemara at the beginning of Masechet Megillah says that from the word et and et, we learn that zmano shel zeh lo kezmano shel zeh. It's very interesting that in all the world except of Yerushalayim, you have just 14th with all the halachot, with all the things, and in Yerushalayim it's a regular day, and then you have Tetvav, which is in Yerushalayim is Purim with all the things, and in most of the world is kimat a regular day. So we find a separation between them both. And then the Rogachover asks about the netilat yadayim of the Kior at the Parashat Kitisa. It's written, Ve'rachatz Aharon mimeno את ידיהם, ורחצו אהרון ובניו ממנו, we say it, in את ידיהם ואת רגליהם. So meaning to say, את ידיהם ואת רגליהם, based on the same Gemara in Megillah, we might think that a Kohen washes his hands separately, and then he washes his legs separately, okay? Because as we know, זמנו של זה, לא כזמנו של זה, the same thing happens with the ידיים and רגליים, את ידיהם ואת רגליהם, so separately. But later on, the Torah itself says, ורחצו ידיהם ורגליהם, so it's לכאורה סתירה. And then he goes into his, he says, it's a machloket, in Menachos, whatever. At the end of the story, he says a very interesting mishpat, that he says, kan lifnei chet ha'egel, and kan achrei chet ha'egel. What does it mean? So, we might explain that the whole machloket, or the whole difference between Avodah Zorah in ancient time and with lehavdi, like Avodah for Kadosh Baruch Hu, is the difference between achdut and separation. And Rav Kook speaks about it in many places, and the Maharal before him and many others. According to Kadosh Baruch Hu, all the things in the world comes from one place. The good things, the bad things. מפי עליון לא תצא הרעות והטוב, okay? But the base of the thing is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is responsible for either making good things or the bad things in the world. I've once brought the Rambam has a different shita, but basically HaKadosh Baruch Hu makes, we don't have two systems. In Sefer Iyov, we can find two systems, because we have the Satan that comes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him independence. He tells him, do to Iyov whatever you want, okay? But even then, we see that the Satan comes to give a din v'cheshbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, meaning to say that we have two different ma'arachot, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is above them. When we gave a shiurim about the Shoah, we brought that you might explain Auschwitz and Chas v'Shalom Har HaBayit like two different places, but in any case, even if Germany was the evilness, the Satan, whatever, and it got its independence during the day of World War II, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is responsible for all of that. That's the achdut of our Ashkafa, meaning to say that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we have harmonic looking at everything in the world. Whereas when we come to Avodah Zarah, so if we know, let's say, the Greeks, they had in their mythology different gods for different things. We have the love god, and we have the hate god, and we have the sea god and the rain god. And if you have a problem with your agricultural field, so pray to the fertility god or the rain god. And sometimes they fight, sometimes they have egos between themselves. So we have a lot of separation. And Rav Kook explained at length that Natsut, Christianity, is the same thing, the same distribution between several kochot, and not uniting them all into one place. Now let's go with all of this introduction and see some of the differences of Vayakhel and before. So first of all, I won't start with Shabbat. I'll go into it in a second. But Moshe, ויאמר משה אל כל הדת בני ישראל לאמור, זה הדבר אשר ציווה השם לאמור, קחו מאיתכם תרומה להשם כל נדיב ליבו. So he repeats about bringing, in fact, all the things that were at the beginning of Parashat Truma. Et ve'et 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 ve'et, a long story. And then he appoints the one that he wants at Betzalel, and then he starts from what? Okay, let's see here. Vayas yeriot izim le'oel. Okay, So we know that there is a famous distinction between what we see in Parashat Truma and what we see in Parashat Vayakhel. In Parashat Truma, we start from the Kelim, from the main thing of the Mishkan, according to Ramban, not Rambam, but according to Ramban, the main thing of the Mishkan, the main matara, the main goal of the Mishkan, is the dwelling of the Shechina among between Shnei Akruvim, among the Aron HaBrit. So Aron HaBrit is the main goal of the Mishkan, according to Ramban. And with this we start in Parashat Truma. Here we don't start with the Aron, we start from the oil, umichse. Okay, so we start from the structure. At the beginning, you need something to build. You need the krashim, you need the yeriot, you need the lulaot, you need the structure. You have a house, and into this house, just later on, would come vayas et krashim, as you see, vechaber et yeriot, karsei nechoshet krashim. I read it briefly, and after all of this, he has parochet, he has amudim. Then vayas Betzalel et ha'aron. So as we can see, and Chazal in Gemara Shabbat Daf Nun Hey, Chazal said that there was a distinction between Evdel between Betzalel and Moshe, but we might say that it's related to the punishment or after Chet HaEgel. Before the punishment, before Chet HaEgel, we see all the things in the world uniting into one goal. So even if you have a house, even if you have details of the Aron and the Shulchan and Menorah and Yeriot and all the things that you have to build, but once you get into the house, what is your goal? My goal is Hashraat HaShechina of HaKadosh Baruch Hu al Shnei Akruvim Vaydaber Eleinu. Okay, so when I come, I buy the house, I don't think about its doors, about its details, about its walls, about the painting, about anything. I just think of the nice atmosphere of the house, how it will look after all is finished. And some people like this, they think just of the goal. They don't have time and they don't know how to think about the details. It's a problem, but they're very idealistic. They look at the goal way, and the same thing happens with the Mishkan before. We think just of the Matara. Later on, how can I go into the Matara? How can I get into it? Okay, so I have krashim, I have krasim, I have yeriot, I'll do it. But now, after Chet HaEgel, Moshe Rabbeinu doesn't want to start from the Aron. He starts from the very practical things of building the house, meaning to say, you are in a lower level, you cannot think of the goal, because I might add that if you think of the goal, so sometimes it doesn't matter the details. And then you really can come to the Kuzari's conclusion that there is no difference between Kruvim or Egel. I just want to worship HaKadosh Baruch Hu, okay? I really like him, I really love him, so I'll make it surah. It doesn't matter all the details. But if you are a very practical person, and you don't talk about the ideals around it, you just talk about the practical way of building, the structure. So you start from the structure, you start from the details, you tell Am Yisrael very deeply and tiresome, do this, take money for this, and then build this. And then just at the end of it, then you talk about the Aron. That's a difference between Nifnei and Achrei. Now, that's one difference, and I want to go to the other one. We know that in Sefer Shemot, we find 6 times the order of Shabbat. We find it very shortly in Parashat Beshalach, in Mara, as we say in the Zmirot of Shabbat, Chukotei b'Mara nitnu be'azara. Okay, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them some chukim of Shabbat in Mara, and there the chok of Shabbat is very, very short and very not detailed. We see there just the hachana, the preparation, ve'echinu et asher yaviu, with the man. meaning to say that that's a base of muktzeh, that's a base of nolad. We have to be prepared from Friday into Shabbat, that we make a achone, but the details of Shabbat itself doesn't appear in Parashat Beshat. Then we have the Aseret HaDibrot in Parashat Yitro, and then we see Shabbat again. Then we have in Parashat Kitisa, Ach et Shabtotai Tishmoru, before Chet HaEgel, and then we have here another times a Shabbat. And if we compare this one and the one Mamash Lifnei Chet HaEgel, because Mamash Lifnei Chet HaEgel, I'll show you in a minute, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Am Yisrael to do Shabbat, and we have the same thing. Vayakhel Moshe את כל עדת ישראל, ויאמר אליהם, the beginning of the parsha, אלה הדברים אשר ציווה השם לעשות אותם. 6 ימים תעשה מלאכה. 6 days will do your מלאכה, וביום השביעי יהיה לכם קודש, שבת שבתון להשם, כל העושה בו מלאכה יומת. לא תבערו אש בכל מושבותיכם ביום השבת. And here it's short, but we know that Chazal learned in the Mishnah in Shabbat all the Lametet Melachot from Melechet HaMishkan. And Chazal understood that the context that Shabbat is here, and from here on you have all the Melechet HaMishkan, comes to say that you can make Melechet HaMishkan whenever you want, but don't do that on Shabbat. Okay, that's one thing. Now let's go to Parashat Kitisa for a second. I hope, yeah, now we have Kitisa. Let's go to here, and we have the same thing. Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, after all the Mizbach HaKtoret and everything, ואתה דבר אל בני ישראל לאמור, אך את שבתותי תשמורו, כי אות היא ביני וביניכם, לדורותיכם, לדעת כי אני השם מקדישכם. ושמרתם את השבת, כי קודש היא לכם, מחלליה מות יומת, כי כל העושה בו מלאכה ונכרתה הנפש ההיא מקרב עמה, 6 ימים יעשה מלאכה, וביום השביעי שבת קודש להשם, שבתון קודש, כל העושה מלאכה ביום השבת, וכולי, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת. So here you have a longer ציווי of the Shabbat, and then we come to Chet HaEgel. So we see Shabbat before Chet HaEgel, we see Shabbat in Vayakhel after Chet HaEgel. Let's discuss the differences between the two parashot. First of all, when I start reading the tzivui of Shabbat, ואתה דבר אל בני ישראל לאמור, the very first words of the tzivui is ach et shabtotai tishmoru. What does it mean, ach?
However,
but, yes? So all I've told you before, meaning to say, all I've told you before here, Mizbach, Kior, Bigdei Ezrat, all the things of the Mishkan, you do them, but just remember that I have Shabbat. Don't hurt Shabbat by the work of the Mishkan. How is it written in Parashat Vayakhel? 6 ימים תעשה מלאכה, וביום השביעי שבתון שבת קודש. As it's written here, but here we have אח את שבתותי תשמור. It might be that the difference between the two tzivuyim is like this. You know that sometimes I can say that you do X and you do Y, and you have both of them, okay? And you try to make your best with X and you try to make your best with Y, but just make any effort in order to not to make a contradiction between them. I'll give you an example, like Medinat Israel, Yehudit ודמוקרטית, okay? So a lot of people say, no, it's really Jewish with all the tzivuim, with all the Torah, with everything. It's really democratic like any other country. And I don't come to the place where I see the contradiction. There are contradictions between Yehudit and democratic, okay, because it's a non-religious system and religious system. They cannot live together. But I am really religious, and I am really a citizen of the world, of Medinat Israel as a democratic person, a place. And then I try not to hurt one with each other. I try that the rules of Judaism won't hurt democracy, and on the contrary, I try that the rules of democracy won't hurt Judaism. If I succeed in that, and it's very difficult, so we have two arachim, okay, and the two arachim are live together, but I just have to balance between them. I'll give you an example: pikuach nefesh and Shabbat. Shabbat is very choshuv erech, okay? Pikuach nefesh is a very choshuv erech. How do I balance between them? So we know that if you have just a question of pikuach nefesh, it's doche kol Torah kula. But the question is whether it's mutar or dchuya. There is a big machloket between the Rishonim, whether it's hutra or dchuya, whether I say that when there is pikuach nefesh, there is no Shabbat, and I can do whatever I want, I don't have to think about the minimum, or to know that it's just b'di'evet, and then you have to do the minimum. Kach or kach, but you can live, even if you think that it's a hutra, you can live with the full erech of Shabbat and the full erech of pikuach nefesh, just don't contradict each other. That's what I think HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Am Yisrael. You might do the melechet HaMishkan, and he comes here at the beginning of the tzivui from the point that you must do all the ingredients and all the orders of melechet HaMishkan. But that's the word ach. Remember, ach et shabtotai tishmor. When we come to Vayakhel after Chet HaEgel, so Am Yisrael cannot explain, cannot understand it, cannot think of two big volumes living together and how to balance them. So they need a separation. Where in France we have a separation between religions and the country, right, and the state, because then it's very easy. You remember that few months ago, one professor came to the TV in France, and they asked him, "Why do you wear a kippah?" He didn't understand the she'ela for a second, but in France, it's very basic, because when you come to a non-religious show, you don't come with smalim datiyim, okay? Because they have a separation between the state and the religion, okay? So after Chet HaEgel, we have ke'ilu separation between Mishkan and Shabbat. Therefore, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells them, Sheshet yamim te'aseh melecha, uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat kodesh le'Hashem. Okay, so it doesn't come from Achet Shabtotai Tishmoru. Do everything you want with the Mishkan, but just keep Shabbat. No, you do everything you want just in a specific limited days from Sunday to Friday. You don't do Shabbat exist fully, and the Mikdash doesn't exist at all on Shabbat. Okay, it's not like as it's written and in Parashat Kitisa before the Chet HaEgel. Okay,
is it not the fact that the Mishkan, the observance of Shabbos in the Mishkan is not the same observance of Shabbos outside the Mishkan, because you have basically Shabbos is different in the Mishkan.
Right, that's a halachic explanation, okay, that we balance between about two Shabbatot. In the Mishkan, Avodah de Rabbanan is permitted to do Chilul Shabbat de Rabbanan, Shvut, Hutra b'Mishkan, and in the Mikdash, and just Avodah de Oraita, and it's two different Shabbatot. You're right, that all over the country is a different Shabbat. But I come from...
No, I mean korbanot in the Mikdash. The Chilul Shabbos, we would call it, is mutar or
right. But, so that's one way of understanding. Okay. I don't want to go into it, but you're totally right. Okay, so we have one understanding is the separation between 6 days and the 7th days. You might ask me, why do you tell me about Vayakhel? Because I see the same posuk even here in Kitisa, and it says the same thing. So first of all, I'm talking about the opening statement. The opening statement says, Achet Shabtotai Tishmoru, meaning to say he comes from the fully Asiya of the Mishkan and just says, don't violate Shabbat, okay? Whereas in Parashat Kitisa, we have a separation. But even the word Ye'aseh and the word Te'aseh is very, very different. The word Yaseh, which the Torah uses in Parashat Kitisa, doesn't talk about the person. It's ke'ilu a depiction of the world. Sheshet Yamim Yaseh. Who would do it? It will be done. Ke'ilu me'atzmo. Uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat Shabbat Kodesh. So if you take a look from afar and you look at the world of the Jews, you see 6 days of work and a day of Shabbat, but it's done from itself. It's not me that do it, okay? But if in Parashat Vayakhel, Sheshet Yamim you do melacha, and Bayom HaShvi'i you shouldn't do melacha. So we have the separation between one and another. Let's see another difference. As I said, Moshe Rabbeinu comes from here, from Perek Lamed Aleph, the beginning of all the Klei Mishkan, and then he comes to Achet Shabtotai Tishmoru, meaning that he has firstly the value of the Mishkan, and then he says, stop, don't do it on Shabbat. If you come to Kitisa, to Vayakhel, you see the Afuch, you see Shabbat, Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat Yisrael vayomer alehem sheshet yamim te'aseh melacha. He doesn't mention the Mishkan, and then he goes to Avodat HaMishkan. He doesn't even mention Avodat HaMishkan, but just the continuation of the parsha of Parashat Vayakhel, as we saw just immediately after Shabbat, we have the continuity of Avodat HaMishkan. Meaning to say that another difference is Moshe Rabbeinu in before Chet HaEgel in Parashat Kitisa comes from the value of Mishkan and balances it by Achet Shabtotai Tishmoru, whereas after Chet HaEgel he comes with Shabbat and then he says about the Mishkan. It's the same difference. Why? Because if I want to tell you, you don't understand, so I just tell you, how do I say to a small kid, don't go to the fire. Forbidden. Don't go to the road. You shouldn't cross the road, okay? קודם כל אני אומר לו מה אסור. Later on, I can tell him on the pavement, you might go yourself, I might see you, but you can go a few meters next to me, but in the road, you shouldn't cross it without my hand, okay? The same thing happens after Chet HaEgel. Firstly, Sheshet Yamim Te'aseh Melacha. There is Shabbat, there is Issur. I don't know what, but first of all, there is an Issur of Shabbos. Later on, we have, okay, do the melacha in the rest of the days. After you know what's the issue, now you have the what you can do. Okay, so it's much similar to what I said in the Shiur 2 days ago about Zeira and Ahava. After Chet HaEgel, you have first of all Zeira. Don't do Shabbat. Okay. Afterwards, okay, what can I do in the 6 days? So do the Melechet HaMishkan. Before Chet HaEgel, it's not like this. I come from the Mishkan. I can do the Mishkan. I'm still at work. I do whatever I want. Just then, HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells me, et Shabtotai Tishmoru. So balance all the work with the Mishkan. So it's an idealistic way of thought before the Chet HaEgel and after Chet HaEgel. In Parashat Kitisa, we don't have much time, so let's go. We see the kiot hi beini uveinichem לדעת כי אני השם מקדשכם, and then we say ושמרו את בני ישראל את השבת לעשות, כן, את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם, כי 6 ימים עשה השם את השמיים ואת הארץ, וביום השביעי שבת וינפש. So we see either that the Shabbat is an ot, is an amen that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us. And secondly, we see that we imitate HaKadosh Baruch Hu, what he did in Ma'aseh Bereshit, that he worked 6 days and at the 7th he started working. Okay, so we say it's the same thing we do on Shabbat. If you come to the Tzivul in Parashat Vayakhel, you don't see any of this. You don't see Ot. It's not mentioned, just the separations. That's it. We don't see any of the inner part of Shabbat, what it symbolizes, the oath, the brit, the covenant that we have with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. We don't see what it symbolizes, that by making the Shabbat, we adhere to Kadosh Baruch Hu, who makes similarity to what he has done in Briat HaOlam. No. In Parashat Vayakhel, after Chet HaEgel, we just see a plain issue. I don't have to tell you the why. I don't have to tell you the anything about the oath. I just tell you about the issue. And the last thing is the last word of the Tzivui, Vayom HaShvi'i Shavat Vayinafash. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't just stop working, but he Vayinafash. What does it mean Vayinafash? So I might explain it that on Shabbat we don't just stop and we're passive and we don't do work, but we have nefesh. We have a separate nefesh. We have a neshama yetera. Shabbat itself has a real meaning. The menucha is not as we think, just stopping from preventing from work. No, but menucha has a real meaning, and we know that the world to come, the Olam Haba, would be the seventh day. It will be that everything is done, and we have in Chazal tzivuim to see the Shabbat as if all your work is done, meaning to say that you have menuchat nefesh, that you really live in a place that all things, you don't run, you don't have things to gain, to achieve, to do. Everything is done. That's the nefesh of Shabbat. On Parashat Vayakhel, after Chet HaEgel, we don't see any of this. Not oath, not Vayinafash, not the tzivui to be like a Kodesh Baruch Hu, nothing. We just see the plain separation between the sixth and the seventh day. So we have to finish. Just repeat, we started from saying that there are couples of parashot in Sefer Shemot, and we see that Truma and it's a very repeated in Vayakhel and Pekudei. But according to the Rogachover, we try to understand the difference between the two appearances of the Mikdash before and after Chet HaEgel. That before it was an idealistic Mikdash, starting with the Aron, starting with the gold, starting with Shabbat as something Vayinafash, as something as oath, as something that you imitate a Kodesh Baruch Hu. You can do whatever you want with Avodat HaMikdash, just try to balance it with Shabbat. You don't need a separation like a baby. After Chet HaEgel, unfortunately, we have all the separation. We start from an Isu, we start from the Yira. You have 6 days, you shouldn't cross the road and go into Shabbat, and you don't balance between two values, you just separate between them. And therefore, we don't have any of Ot, any of Vayinafash, any of all the things that are symbolized in Shabbat, just the plain Easter itself. We'll stop here. Shavua Tov. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you.
Very nice.